Hi everyone, my name is Egor, and today I will present to you the paper called Time and Space in Strategy Discourse, Implications for the Intertemporal Choice. This paper was written by Dr. Donal Crilly, who is currently an Associate Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship in London Business School. Dr. Donal Crilly's research interests include stakeholder theory, managerial cognition, and intertemporal choice. His work has been published in journals such as Academy of Management Journal, the Strategic Management Journal, Organizational Science, and the Journal of International Business Studies. This particular article was published in Strategic Management Journal number 38 in 2017. Main question Dr. Donal Crilly addresses in this article is, do analogies between time and space reflect and even influence how executives address the trade-off between the short and long term? This article distinguishes two ways of framing the future with implications for decision-making. Are we approaching the future or the ego-moving frame, or is it approaching us, the time-moving frame? Dr. Crilly conducts a mixed theory method study in this article. The first study sheds light on the firm's use of spatial language in their calls with analysis and informs propositions, which he then investigates in subsequent studies involving managers and financial professionals. He assesses whether time and ego-moving temporal frames are associated with different orientations toward the future, study number 2, and links frames and control beliefs to decision-making in the face of trade-off between short and long-term returns. It's study number 3. We will take a look at them close in next minutes. Here, I would love you to make a quick test with me. You can pause the video here, read the following question and answer it for yourself to see in which paradigm you are thinking right now. The question is, imagine that a meeting originally scheduled for the next Wednesday is moved forward 2 days. On which day will it now take place? As you can see, people answer this question differently. Some people answer Monday and some people answer Friday. Actually, it's 50-50. So variations in answer may occur because people conceptualize space and time in different ways, leading to differences in what moving forward means when used in relation to time, and as Dr. Crilly stated. Monday is a time-moving frame answer, meeting being rescheduled closer to the listener. Friday, in its time, is the answer which lies in the ego-moving frame and means that meeting moves closer to the person who answered the question. This happens because ego or self-moving is moving forward towards a specific event. Here you can see two examples of time-moving and ego-moving frames used by executives from Facebook and AT&T. If there ever comes a day when you and I disagree about the future direction of the company, is the example of time-moving temporal frame from the Facebook's letter to shareholders at their IPO process. The second one, we've been driving towards this future for some time, is the ego-moving example from AT&T 2013 annual report. But how usage of different frames can influence the intertemporal choice? Dr. Crilly used field studies of Duffy et al. From 2014 here as a reference. They stated that people who interpret information through a time-moving frame show greater consequences and less procrastination than those who are using an ego-moving frame. Ego frame users attend later to their appointments and complete tasks closer to the deadline. If a person uses ego-moving frame, future events appear to be farther in the future and thus seems to be less important, severe or big. In contrast, time-moving frame users are waiting constantly for the event to strike and therefore are prepared in a greater manner. Any future-oriented action should involve agent, person who is responsible for such action, decision, and future implications of them. Agency is represented differently in ego and time-moving frames. In ego-moving frames, main agent is the person, for example, CEO. In contrast, in time-moving frame, time is the main actor. Here, the definition of locus of control is introduced in the paper for the first time. The degree to which persons expect that the reinforcement or an outcome of their behavior is contingent on their own behavior or personal internal characteristics versus the degree to which persons expect that the reinforcement or outcome is a function of chance, luck, or fate, is under the control of powerful others or simply unpredictable. This is the locus of control. Locus of control has influence on opportunity evaluation and goal-oriented behavior. Decision makers with an internal locus have confidence to achieve success and readily go after opportunities, whereas an external locus magnifies uncertainty as decision makers view outcomes as dependent on the external environment. However, locus of control could also be influenced by individual level or contextual level factors and temporal frames, but we all need to remember that temporal frames are not the only factors which have an influence on locus of control. As I said before, there are 3 studies described in the paper. Main archival study and 2 supporting ones, frames, locus of control in temporal choice, and frames, locus of control and decision making. Let's start one by one. Main study is an archival one. Here, Dr. Crilly citation undertook textual analysis to A, identify how managers use ego and time-moving language when describing future intentions, and B, to establish propositions about how ego and time-moving form of language map to ways of constructing the future. In this study, 10 pharmaceutical companies were taken in consideration. Each of them had one of two ideal business models. First, business model is oriented on the long-term moves, characterized by high number of research and development investments, and second one is oriented on more so-called right now profits from selling generic products. Participants groups consisted mostly of CEOs and CFOs of the companies. Along with the research and development expenditure to sales ratio, social performance score, which consists of employment quality, health and safety, training and development, diversity, human rights, community, and product responsibility, is taken in consideration. In total, 674 time or ego moving mentions of the future were analyzed. Let's take a look on the results. First, the ego moving frame is largely used to express the near future, whereas the time moving frame is frequently used to express distant events. Second, that although the ego moving frame is mainly used to describe events that are likely or under the firm's control, executives in some firms also use time moving frames to articulate strategic choice. Additional results are, as you can see on the slide, firms with high research and development to sales ratios have a high incidence of the time moving frame. On average, CFOs use ego-moving language about 24% more frequently than CEOs. Plausibly, CFOs focus on predicting near-term results, whereas CEOs often refer to long-term strategies. Here you can also see two quotes from their study. First is by Eli Lilly, CEO, the company which was part of the research. Building a robust pipeline and transforming our business both to excel in an increasingly challenging healthcare environment as well as to prepare for the patient expirations coming in the next decade. This quote is a good example of a time moving frame. The second one is our primary focus in the near future will be to drive our business is by the CEO of the company Milan, also from 2008 and also from this study, is a good representation of ego moving frame. Following the first study, two propositions has been made. Proposition one, the use of ego moving frame will be associated with a stronger focus on the short term than the use of the time moving frame. Proposition two, decision makers' control beliefs moderate the influence of temporal frames in prompting a long-term focus in strategic decisions. An internal locus of control will positively moderate the influence of time-moving temporal frames on strategic decisions. In order to confirm or disprove them, let's move to study number 2 and 3. First supporting studies frames locus of control and intertemporal choice. Here is a quote from the author. Building on the analysis above, I devised this study to assess the relationship between temporal frames of reference, locus of control, and intertemporal choice. Subsequently, I test the combined influence of temporal frames and control beliefs on intertemporal choice in the context of strategic decision. In this study, 176 business managers have participated. All of them were residents of the United States and native English speakers. 46% of them were in top management positions, with more than 80% of them held a university degree, and around 24% of them held the postgraduate qualification. Study was conducted in the format of online survey, where participants were asked the same question I asked you in the beginning of the presentation, followed by the matching task, where subjects were supposed to indicate how much money they would need to receive after 1, 5, 10, and 20 years instead of receiving $1,000 tomorrow. Attention filter was also implemented to keep their attention in the survey. Let's take a look at the results. The ego moving frame is associated with a higher discounting of the future returns than the time moving frame for the periods of medium to long delay. This is the first outcome. This result is consistent with the idea that the ego moving frame is linked to the prioritizing the present over the future. In the outcome of the studies, almost 55% of respondents answered Monday and therefore made a decision within the time moving frame, while around 45% answered Friday, which falls into the ego moving frame category. As for the matching task, after 1 year, Monday or time moving frame respondents would need a little bit more than $2,000 in place of $1,000 today, whereas Friday or ego moving frame respondents would need almost $3,500. This gap rises to $6,500 versus $10,500 after 5 years, which equivalent to annual discount rates of 14.68 and 20.53% respectively. This result is consistent with the idea that the ego moving frame is linked to prioritizing the present over the future, and therefore is consistent with the proposition number 1, though it does not provide evidence of causal relationship. Let's take a look at the study number 3. The aims of study number 3 are A, to assess support with an experiment for the relationship between temporal frames and how people value future returns, and B, to test the moderating effect of control beliefs. Study 3 had 105 participants with average 9.67 years of business experience. 44 of them had the previous industry experience, and 27 of them had the previous financial experience. Participants were divided into two groups. Group number one were introduced with the ego-moving information. The company moved its annual shareholder meeting forward from March 11 to March 18th. Group number two were introduced with the time-moving information. The company moved its annual shareholder meeting forward from March 18th to March 11th. First, they were asked to reschedule unrelated to business events like Olympic Games or film presentation. The manipulation check confirmed that respondents or in the time-moving condition were more likely to respond Friday than those in the ego-moving conditions. Secondly, they read case scenario about the pharmaceutical company, which you can see on this slide. They were asked to give CEO some advice regarding potential acquisition. The aim was to understand whether the subject viewed a likely NPV positive investment as sensible if it had negative short-term consequences, rather than have them compare it against explicit alternatives. As a result, Dr. Crilly stated the direction of the effect of the time-moving frame on support for the long-term decision depends on the strength of the locus of control. Next, he plotted the degree of support by treatment, time-moving frame, ego-moving frame, and a locus of control, internal and external one. To support the gain in sight, participants received target earnings forecasts in the details, with estimated EBIT for first to fifth year of operations. Participants then indicated the maximum sum they would offer in order to acquire the following firm. Those in time-moving conditions stated the sum a little bit less than $400 million, while those in ego-moving conditions stated that their maximum sum they would love to pay would be a little bit more than $200 million. After additional estimations, specifically analysis of variance, researchers concluded that while the locus of control prompts supports for the action, it does not directly influence how future rewards are valued in the present. Temporal frames shape how future returns are weighted in the present, but taking long-term action also requires a sense of control over achieving the desired returns. The study number 3 finds a positive interaction between the time-moving frame and opportunity frame on support for the future-oriented investment. Let's go to discussion. As Dr. Crilly wrote, maximizing short-term returns can be inconsistent with achieving sustainable competitive advantage, with manager psychology and capital market expectations often producing a suboptimal focus on the short term. This article proposed managers to think about the time in a different way, in the physical realities of motions in space. While strategists do talk about the importance of the agency in a strategy, they should also focus on the balance between a time-moving frame or recognizing the advent of the future as an inventable and controlled beliefs, or recognizing one's capacity to influence future results. Last 3 parts, which are going to go quickly through, are cognitive linguistic explanation of temporal choice, practical implications, communicating internally and externally, and extensions and limitations. It's crucial to go through these statements and through the questions which will bring us for the implications for the future research. First, a cognitive linguistic explanation. The cognitive linguistic lens advances efforts to ground strategic theory in realistic assumptions and sees the time as something spatially. Managers' focus of control can have different effects across organizational context. Perception of control over outcomes fosters support for the long-term strategies in condition but future is framed as a time moving. As for the practical implications, temporal frames can motivate or discourage long-term strategies. Ego and time-moving analogies might affect how actors represent time and visually. Temporal frames also potentially influence the reactions of external audience. And now let's talk about extensions and limitations. Here we can raise 4 questions which will warrant our discussion on Wednesday. Where do temporal frames come from? Could we connect them to the different strategic intangibles like, for example, reputation or competition? Possible extension of the research and scarcity of resources on time and ego-moving frames, and what limitations language differences can bring. As for the conclusion, analogies between time and space feature prominently in organizational discourse as they help executive conceive of time in terms of objects that they experience more concretely. 2 core ways of mapping time to space, ego-moving versus time-moving frames, are associated with distinct way of constructing the future. Time-moving frames make the future appear more proximate, and interaction with the control beliefs underpin support from managers and investors for decisions that privilege long-term returns over the short-term returns. Thank you for your attention. See you on Wednesday.